Well, hello and welcome to this week's A Photographic Life. Shall we talk a little bit about Richard Avedon? I think we probably should. For somebody my age, the name Avedon means only one thing: an incredible canon of photography that spanned a number of decades and, I suppose in a way, defined editorial photography, but also inspired so many portrait and fashion photographers. But for a lot of people, perhaps who are younger, Avedon doesn't mean what he means to us. Well, there's something about to happen that might actually change that. But I'm going to talk about that in a moment. First of all, let's have a few facts, shall we? Just for those of you who aren't quite so informed about Mr. Richard Avedon, who was born in 1923 and lived his life in New York City. His interest in photography began at an early age, and he joined the Young Men's Hebrew Association Camera Club when he was 12 years old. He attended DeWitt Clinton High School in the Bronx in America, where he co-edited the school's literary magazine, The Magpie, with the great writer James Baldwin. Avedon joined the armed forces in 1942 during World War II, serving as photographer's mate second class in the US Merchant Marine. As he described it, my job was to do identity photographs. I must have taken pictures of 100,000 faces before it occurred to me I was becoming a photographer. After 2 years of service, he left the Merchant Marine to work as a professional photographer, initially creating fashion images and studying with the legendary Harper's Bazaar art director, art director Alexei Brodovich at the design laboratory of the New School for Social Research. At the age of 22, Avedon began working as a freelance photographer, primarily for Harper's Bazaar. Initially, he was denied the use of a studio by the magazine, and therefore he photographed models and fashions on the streets, in nightclubs, at the circus, on the beach, and at other uncommon locations for the time. Under Brodovich's tutelage, he quickly became the lead photographer for Harper's Bazaar. From the beginning of his career, Avedon made formal portraits for publication in Theatre Arts, Life, Look, and as well as Harper's Bazaar magazine, as I've just said. He was fascinated by photography's capacity for suggesting the personality and evoking the life of his subjects. As he wryly said, "My photographs don't go below the surface. I have great faith in surfaces. A good one is full of clues." After guest editing the April 1965 issue of Harper's Bazaar, Avedon quit the magazine after facing a storm of criticism over his collaboration with models of colour. He joined Vogue, where he worked for more than 20 years. In 1992, he became the first staff photographer at The New Yorker under the editor Tina Brown, where his portraiture helped redefine the aesthetic of the magazine. During this period, his fashion photography appeared almost exclusively in the French magazine Egoiste, which, if you haven't seen, I highly recommend you try and get your hands or at least your eyes onto. His brand-defining work and long associations with Calvin Klein, Revlon, Versace and dozens of other companies resulted in some of the best-known advertising campaigns in American history. They gave him the freedom to pursue personal projects in which he explored his cultural, political and personal passions, including the American Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, and a celebrated cycle of photographs of his father, Jacob Israel Avedon. In 1976, for Rolling Stone magazine, he produced The Family, a collective portrait of the American power elite at the time of the country's bicentennial election. From 1979 to 1985, he worked extensively on a commission from the Amon Carter Museum of American Art, ultimately producing the iconic show and book In the American West. Avedon's first museum retrospective had been held at the Smithsonian Institution as far back as 1962, but he continued many major museum shows. including two at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, the Amon Carter Museum of American Art, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. His first book of photographs, Observations, with an essay by Truman Capote, was published in 1959. He continued to publish books of his works throughout his life, including Nothing Personal in 1964, with an essay by his friend James Baldwin, Portraits, 1947 to 1977, with an essay by Harold Rosenberg, an autobiography in 1993, which I have to say I think is the one to own, alongside Evidence, 1944 to 1994. And also The 60s, which I think is a little bit of a throwaway book, but that's just up to me. Anyway, or my opinion. Anyway, after suffering a cerebral hemorrhage while on assignment for The New Yorker, Avedon died in San Antonio, Texas on October the 1st, 2004. He had established the Richard Avedon Foundation during his lifetime, and books and exhibitions have been continually published and shown ever since his death. So I said at the beginning that it may well be that Avedon's work, his life, and I suppose in a sense his approach to photography may have a rebirth. And that's because of a film that was just shown at Cannes Film Festival, made by Ron Howard, the film director. And the film is about Avedon, and it's titled quite simply Avedon. It's one of those films that are collage in style, in approach, very similar, I think, to what Ron Howard did with the Beatles. I think what's interesting about all those kinds of films, and coming to mind is certainly one about Cecil Beaton that I've seen, one about Eugene Smith, I've seen one about Lee Miller, of course. I made one myself about Bill Jay, making films about people who aren't available to be interviewed or have any input because the people have died. It presents some issues. Primarily, it's all down to the quality of the archive, I think, and not too many talking heads. I just saw a very good film, a Dogworth production, on John Lennon and a particular concert, I think it was about 1972, which was purely made up of archival material. And of course, there's a very famous one around the racing driver, Ayrton Senna, that won a lot of awards. So there's definitely a way of doing that kind of film. And I think that if you are interested in documentary filmmaking, finding an interesting subject and taking that approach can be very fruitful. So we wait to see what happens with the Avedon film. I'm not sure yet where it's going to be shown and how it's going to be shown, but my hope is it will come onto one of the streaming platforms at some point this year. Funnily enough, it always reminds me, whenever I see the name Ron Howard, of something that happened to me. I was on the Pinewood studio lot in Los Angeles, and in the cinema there, where they show first screenings of films. After the presentation I'd watched, I went to the gentleman's toilet and to the lavatory, and standing there at the urinal, Ron Howard came up and stood next to me on one side and Martin Scorsese on the other. Not much more I can say about it than that, but there you go. That's just one of my memories. Whilst we're talking about one of the greats of photography, it reminds me of something I saw recently. Rolling Stone magazine in the United States had put together a list of the top, I think it was 30, may have been 50, American songwriters, and it caused lots of controversy, as such lists always do, as to who was included and who wasn't included. I think also one of the other issues around the list was that the people who had compiled the list were journalists on the magazine, none of which had any background as musicians or songwriters, and therefore the argument was put forward, as it so often is, what do they know? I see similar lists of photographers. I've even been guilty of producing one myself. Actually, one of the best ones I think I did was The Bad Boys and the Bad Girls of Photography. I enjoyed doing that one. But I suppose I could put forward the point that I suppose, have a little bit of knowledge, having been a photographer, am a photographer, written about photography, commissioned photography, curated photography, so on and so forth. But those lists, don't take them too seriously. It's that time on the podcast now for some listeners' letters. As I always say, I always enjoy reading them. Some of them are incredibly long and in-depth, so thank you for all the effort you put into them. But occasionally I do a little curation of the many I receive every week, just to give you an idea, I suppose, of how your fellow listeners are responding to what we put on the podcast. And also this week, some of the articles which I write at UnitedNationsOfPhotography.com. So, as I always say, if you enjoy this podcast, do drop over there, drop in on the website, and usually 2 or 3 articles are written each week. They're always very short. I think they're to the point. And the point of them is to sort of spark some conversation and thought. So anyway, here's one responding to the podcast. It says, "Hi Grant, I just listened to your podcast on Photo London. You wanted to hear some opinions. Here are mine. I naively went thinking I would hopefully enjoy some work and learn something. Instead, I was confronted with soul-destroying corporate booths with laptop, immersed gallery owners. Much of the work was mixed media, incorporating photography, but only as a part of the work. Where was the straight photography? Or is this the way things are going? The book section was better, but made clear that you have to pay or be well known to be published. I returned for a second time to try and learn something because I did not want to be depressed by this money fest. I went to 2 talks. The one on photo books by Thames and Hudson was dreadful and hijacked by an egomaniac. I wish I had known about the Peckham thing. Anyway, better leave off the gripe. Best, Beatrice." Hi Grant, just a quick message to say I really enjoyed your podcast with Fiona. That was the one also about Photo London. I really liked your Glastonbury idea. It's very similar to what I always had in mind for Photo North, combining great talent with everyday people in an inclusive, buzzy atmosphere where visitors leave feeling they've learned and experienced something special. Finding the right venue within our meagre budget is difficult. I wanted to use the outdoor space outside our venue, but the council charges £1,500 per day per stall. We'd hoped to bring in Caravan Gallery, Photocopy Club and others, but the pitch fees are ridiculous. We're also applying for funding to support young creatives with workshops and exhibition opportunities for those who haven't had the benefit of higher education and may have come from marginalised backgrounds, though, as always, it always comes down to funding. Keep up the great work. We all appreciate you, Sharon. Well, that's very kind. Thank you, Sharon. Here's a missive, a note, a letter that came in on the back of one of the articles I published concerning the approach or the desire for nostalgia in photography. It's from somebody called David, and it starts off like this. "I had not come across the trad wives thing before, but I hope their disingenuous attention-seeking posts make them happy. I also wish all analogue photographers well. I hope their beautifully crafted work is digitally scanned perfectly, allowing the rest of us to see it. I say this as a bloke who understands the pleasures of upside-down ground glass screens, bellows extension calculations, and the effects of reciprocity failure. The sad but true punchline is extensive Sinar kit for sale. I love the romantic notion of integrity within any traditional process. I love the taste of homemade bread, but I hate new photos that possess flavours of years gone by." Here's David said thanks for the article. Another one came in here also saying thank you for the article. This one was about photography being perfect and photoshopping and post-production. Starts off, perfect is boring. I see this all the time in the fashion industry. the over-retouching, the samey-sameness of blandly perfect imagery that, with some exceptions, makes 90% of fashion imagery indistinguishable and interchangeable, where one photographer's work looks almost identical to another's, and it becomes hard to tell which brand is which, and they have to stamp the brand name on the image. I believe it's an industry, and as has been pointed out above, a social media and now AI problem, not just a photographer following the crowd problem. After all, the client wants what the client wants, which these days can be, oh, XYZ got a ton of views on Instagram, so let's do that. If the client only hires photographers who shoot bland perfection, then photographers might be forgiven for producing such work to put food on the table. Kudos to the brands, still valuing difference, imperfection, and keeping their imagery off-centre through great art direction, risk-taking, and employing photographers with distinctive visual languages. I rejoice when I look at an image and know who took it or what brand it is purely from the visual language. When every image is perfect, no image is perfect. And that's from Peter in Australia. So a little taster there of the kinds of letters we get, and also what other people who are listening to and reading the articles we write in this podcast are feeling. So if you get that feeling, if you feel you agree or disagree with what you hear, or you'd like to share your experience with us, please do that. You can email me through the website unitednationsofphotography.com, or you can get me on Threads at UN of Photo, Instagram at UN of Photo, or through YouTube at UN of Photo. So much choice. Anybody who listens to podcasts or watches YouTube will be very well acquainted with the host asking you to subscribe and to like. These simple actions, these simple free actions, do feed the algorithm gods, and by doing so it helps spread the word. A lot of those people are obviously focused on numbers so that they can in return get revenue. That's not something that I'm focused on for that reason. And in fact, I don't get any revenue out of anything I do to do with the United Nations of Photography, because I don't do it for that reason. If that were to happen in the future, I'll have to deal with that. But I always fight against taking on sponsors, which is why we have no sponsors on the podcast. It's not for want of interest. I'm contacted very regularly by people who want to give me money for them to feature. And that's quite often for books as well, or photographers, or PR companies trying to place things with us. And I say no to all of those things. I come from an old school approach of editorial integrity, and for me that's important. Having said that, if you would be so kind as to like or subscribe or leave a positive comment somewhere wherever you listen to this, as well as getting in touch with me directly, obviously, what that helps us do is spread the word, spread the conversation. And the more people that are involved in this conversation, that are hearing what our contributors have to offer, I think it's a good thing. There are a lot of photography podcasts out there. There aren't that many, or as many as there were a few years ago. It's really tough to keep going. Everybody's got a podcast in them, they say. Well, I'd argue that everybody's got one or two episodes. As you know, as a regular listener, we're well over 400 episodes now, and that takes a lot more work and commitment. But I still love it, and I still enjoy it, and I hope you do too. So do please join us here in the boat and join us in sharing what we say by telling other people that we exist. I think that's really important. Increasingly, at the moment, a lot of people don't feel they necessarily exist. It's very easy, and I have a lot of conversations with people who feel the same, that life's moving a bit too quickly and they're getting left behind. Well, this is a safe space. Hopefully it feels like dropping into the pub or in for a coffee and We have a chat, we share opinions, we don't always agree. But of course, you know what we do, because it's so important, we take care.